Okay, and we're live.
Thank you. Welcome to the October 23rd, 2023 joint meeting of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees, Finance and Facilities, and Institutional Risk and Compliance Committees. The meeting is being held in person with committee members participating remotely. At this time, Board Secretary Michelle Courier will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if quorum of Finance and Facilities Committee members is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person where your name is called.
Vahid Ontazieri,
Present via WebEx.
Armin Sabatoni,
Present via WebEx.
Maria Ducharme,
Present via WebEx.
Michael Fascitelli,
Present via WebEx.
Joseph Formicola,
Present via WebEx.
Courtney Nicolato,
Present via WebEx.
Melissa Sutherland,
Present via WebEx.
Mark Parlange. I know he'll be on momentarily. We do have a quorum.
The quorum of Finance and Facilities Committee members is present.
I'll ask the Board of Secretary Michelle Courier conduct a roll call attendance to determine if a quorum is present for the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee members. Please respond present via WebEx or present in person where your name is called.
Ravi Luna,
Present via WebEx.
Matthew Lenz,
Present via WebEx.
Joseph Formicola,
Present via WebEx.
Richard Humphrey, Reva Goyal, David Caprio, Michael Gray, Mark Parlange. We have a quorum.
A quorum for the Institutional Risk Compliance Committee members is present. I'll call this joint meeting to order. Reminder to all members, for the benefit of our audience and the note taker, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion, or second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on as remote members, and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. This time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional homeland of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. The first order of business is a motion to amend the agenda to move discussions item 2B, 2C, and 2D to the end of the agenda following the action items. May I have a motion that the Finance and Facilities Committee and the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee approve the amendment to the agenda, moving discussion items 2B, 2C, and 2D to the end of the agenda following the action items.
This is Courtney, so moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Mike
Joe
Fascitelli,
Formicola, second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The next item agenda is approval of the minutes. Minutes from September 13th, 2023 Institutional Risk Compliance Committee, enclosure 1A. May I have a motion that the Institutional Risk and Compliance Committee approve the minutes of the September 13, 2023 committee meeting?
Joe Formicola, so moved.
Is there a second to the motion?
Matt Lance, so moved.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
Aye. Yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? There being no abstentions, the motion carries.
This time, we will take a vote to approve the minutes of the September 14, 2023 Finance and Facilities meeting. May I have a motion that the Finance and Facilities Committee approve the minutes of the September 14, 2023 committee meeting?
This is Armin, so moved.
May I have a second?
Courtney,
Joe
second.
Formicola.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion to approve the minutes of September 14, 2023 committee meeting is approved. The next item is item number 2, discussion items. I'm trying to see quickly. Okay.
We're actually going to move those to the end, right? In favor of the action items?
Yeah, the first one.
We are correct. Okay.
We're actually 2A.
2A.
We're gonna do the discussion item 2A. The motion will be to start with 2B to the end. So we are gonna start with 2A first. Thanks.
That one's yours, Robbie.
Okay, so 2A.
Yes.
right.
That's fiscal year 2023 external audit report presentation.
Yeah, if we could have Abby Benson, Angela Miller, or Mike Johns discuss this discussion item.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chair Luna. And I'm Abby Benson, the Interim VP for Administration and Finance. Angela Miller, our AVP for Financial Operations and Controller, is also on. She has worked very closely with our auditor, CLA, to go through our audit for the fiscal year 2023. So Mike Johns from CLA is here to give an overview of the audit. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Abby, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. We have some prepared remarks regarding the completion of the 2023 audit. However, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to jump in and go ahead and ask them. And if we could advance the slide. What we're going to go over today is the audit process at a high level and a scope, basically what we were engaged to do for the current fiscal year end. Talk about internal control communications, some required communications under the auditing standards, and what we have left to do in this audit cycle. And we'll wrap up with just some very high level industry trends we're seeing in higher education. Next slide, please. So what were we engaged to do? We were engaged to express an opinion on the university's financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2023. In the audit process, management is responsible for the fair presentation and the internal controls to make sure those financial statements aren't materially misstated. And our responsibility is to perform auditing tests and procedures to enable us to express an opinion on those financial statements. The financial statements are prepared in accordance with US GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. We're required to audit those financial statements under US generally accepted auditing standards. And because of the federal awards received by the university, government auditing standards. As it relates to internal controls, we do gain an understanding of the internal controls, walk them through, and also perform some tests. But the reason for doing that is to enable us to perform our what we call substantive procedures. We do not express an opinion on the internal controls, and that doesn't happen in any audit environment other than the publicly traded company SOX world, Sarbanes-Oxley world. And then we're required to report out to this group at the end of our procedures. Next slide, please. We're required to perform what we call risk-based audit. So as an audit team, we get together, look at the preliminary figures, numbers of the university, industry trends, what specifically is going on at the University of Rhode Island, and we do a risk assessment, which is if something were to go wrong, where is there a higher risk it would go wrong? And we focus more of our attention on the higher risk areas and less attention on the lower risk areas. Some of the risk areas we identified in the performance of this year's audit was internal controls, including controls over the disbursements and receipt cycles and general information technology application controls. Revenue recognition, is revenue recorded in the correct period? Was it properly cut off, and does it exist? Debt and long-term liabilities, we do a search for unrecorded liabilities and confirm obligations with external parties. I'll save the federal awards to a later slide, but there were some new accounting standards to implement this year. They are called GASB numbers 94 and 96. GASB 96 did have an impact on the university's financial statements. What this standard requires is that any contracts where we obtain a license for software, the past allowable treatment was to expense as you make payments. Under this new standard, you're required to record an intangible asset and a liability to the vendor for the right to use their software. Operating expenses is another risk area, just making sure that, again, there's proper cutoff, the liabilities are accurately stated. And then significant estimates, which we have a slide on a little bit later to talk about, but the financial statements do contain estimates made by management, and we're required to take a look at those and make sure there's no bias or any other matters. Next slide, please. So the results of our audit, we are issuing an unmodified audit opinion, have issued an unmodified audit opinion. That's the highest level of assurance a CPA firm can provide. It's commonly referred to as the clean opinion. The standard opinion was modified with an emphasis of matter paragraph, and all that paragraph is saying is that the university properly adopted the new accounting standards it was required to adopt this year, and there was no issues with that. The statements do contain what's referred to as required supplementary information. That would be your management's discussion and analysis, and also some benefit plan schedules at the end of the report. We do not audit that information. We perform some limited procedures, including comparing them to the basic financial statements and making some questions about how they were prepared, but we do not audit them and do not express an opinion on them, and that's common practice. Next slide, please. So while we don't express an opinion on internal controls, if we become aware of issues as we're performing our audit, we are required to report them to this committee. In the auditing standards, we have 3 levels of deficiencies in internal controls. The highest or worst being material weaknesses, which would mean we don't believe that a control exists or is not operating properly to identify a material misstatement. Significant deficiency is the next level down, which is less severe than a material weakness, but we feel in our judgment, the governance of an organization should be aware of. And the lowest level would be the management recommendations. We have no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies that we identified to report to this group, which speaks highly of the financial management and controls you have in place at the university. We do have some management comments or recommendations that we will go over in a executive session. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this part of the presentation over to Brian Crawley, who is a manager who worked with me on the engagement. Brian?
Thanks, Mike. As part of the required governance communications, we're required to give any kind of updates from our initial engagement and planning procedures and identify any changes in scope that were identified as part of those steps. And there are no changes. We completed our risk-based procedures as we had determined in planning, and we're able to follow throughout those procedures throughout the end of the audit. As Mike noted, there were 2 GASBs are implemented in the current year. GASB 96 did have a material impact on the financials with bringing on initial right to use asset and offsetting liability of about $11 million. So worked with Angela and her team to document and test that implementation. As Mike noted before, the financial statements do include estimates. There's various estimates throughout the financial statements, and throughout the audit, our responsibility is to make sure that those estimates are reasonable, appropriately disclosed, and show no changes in bias. So basically, those estimates were consistently implemented in the last 2 years, and there's notes detailing the financials. Most of those estimates relate to liabilities related to actuarial estimates as far as pension and OPEB and other significant estimates that are done by actuaries. We have no issues with those estimates. We're also required to detail that there are no difficulties with managements, no outside firms used as part of the consultation of the audit, and no disagreements of any kind. As far as other adjustments, there are no audit adjustments. So basically the college's books and records are the same as are presented to us as were shown in the final draft. There was one past audit adjustment related to transactions between the college and the foundation regarding the recording and recognition of some of those contributions. And there was a difference between those amounts that we've noted in our required communication of about 793,000, but that amount was not material for the university's financial statements. Next slide, please. So as far as the next steps, we're in the process of starting the NCAA AUP procedures on the athletics. So that's a standard report that we do each year. So the goal with that is to make sure everything's completed and wrapped up in this calendar year, and we believe we'll be able to do that so we can finish that report. As far as the single audit is well underway. We did a number of those procedures during the spring, fall term to update our planning. So we're in the process of following up and wrapping up those items. And similar to the NCAA agreed upon procedure, we plan to have that finished in this calendar year. So there's no issues to report at this point, but it's still in the preliminary phases, and any kind of communication will be had when we get to the review process of the single audit.
Next slide, please. So the single audit, as a reminder, is issued by the state of Rhode Island. The state auditors tell us which federal programs they want us to perform compliance tests of. Those programs for this year are the Student Financial Assistance Cluster and the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds. And the state asks that we report back to them in the January timeframe, and then they take our results, all their results, all the other auditors' results, and the filing with the federal government is done at the state level, so not at the university level. Briefly, just some current trends we're seeing in higher education as we work with clients across the country. We're still seeing enrollment pressures with the enrollment cliff coming, and especially in the Northeast, just schools competing for a smaller pool of students. At the same time, we're seeing, due to inflation and other factors, that the operating expenses in higher education are continuing to increase. These two factors alone caused Moody's to downgrade their outlook on the higher education industry, as they believe in the aggregate that expenses are going to outpace revenue growth. So a lot of our clients are laser focused on the budget process and the enrollment process, and just planning and looking ahead to make sure there's no issues. We're still seeing, unfortunately, a lot of bad actors targeting colleges and universities in terms of ransomware. Just in my one office at CLA, we've had 2 clients who had a successful ransomware attack where they were locked out of their systems and had to either pay to get it unlocked or try to back up what they could. So it's real and it's out there, and we're seeing costs related to the diligence and having to defend against those attacks go up. And it's a topic that through the course of higher education hasn't been very applicable, but we are seeing mergers and acquisition activity. We're seeing large public schools acquiring nonprofit schools. We're seeing for-profit businesses potentially acquiring small private schools. A lot of the larger entities across the country, I think, are thinking strategically about this. What are there schools out there that maybe aren't in the best financial condition that do something we don't do, or have land we don't have? And we are seeing a lot of merger and acquisition activity in the industry. Next slide, please. Won't go more than a minute on this, but we have new auditing standards next year that will increase the scope of the tests we're required to perform around the systems and information technology controls at the university. Currently, we do bring in IT specialists to assist with the audit process and making sure that we're kicking the tires with those general application controls as they relate to the financial systems, but those procedures are going to increase going forward due to the impact of the new standards. Those are the end of our plan comments. I know we do have an executive session at some point where we have some other information to go over, but I'd be happy to take any questions anyone may have.
There being no questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. I think we're Again, we're leaving 2B, 2C, 2D till the end. The next item on the agenda is item 3, which is to go into executive session to discuss two items, 3A, 3B. The first being litigation, the second being information technology security items. So may I have a motion that the Finance and Facilities and Institutional Risk and Compliance Committees of the URI Board of Trustees convene into executive session pursuant to RIGL 42465A2 to discuss the annual report on litigation, including all federal, state, and administrative proceedings currently pending or that were resolved after June 30th, 2022, and potential and anticipated litigation, and for discussion regarding an assessment of information technology security pursuant to RIGL 42465A3 as it relates to the matter of security, including but not limited to the deployment of security personnel or devices, and RIGL 42465A7 as it relates to the question of the investment of public funds.
This is Almond, so moved.
There's a second to the motion?
This is Maria. Second.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The committee will now convene into executive session for the reasons specified. It is anticipated that the executive session will last approximately 30 minutes, after which the committees will reconvene in open session. The live stream will be paused during the executive session and will resume once the executive session is ended and the committee reconvenes in open session. For those committee members participating via WebEx, please confirm by saying yes that no other person is present and or able to hear the executive session discussion at the remote location. Yes?
Yes.
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 You do not automatically move into the breakout session. Join the session when prompted on your computer screen by clicking on the Join Now button. We will now pause while committee members are moved into a breakout room for the executive session. Please mute your microphone during the move.
Okay, and before we do that, real quick, caller, there's a caller on the line. Can you please identify yourself?
Hi, Michelle. It's Tracy Angel. I actually had to connect on my phone just because the video, my laptop wasn't connecting.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we will be going into executive session now.
Hi, for those of you from Scion or Canon, just wanted to let you know if we hang here, they'll come back and then we'll be back in session.
Okay, thanks. He said 30 minutes, so I figured I would just hang out. Thank you.
Thanks for confirming, Ryan.
and the Fine Arts Building. In total, our financial statements show an increase in net position before capital appropriations and gifts of 3.76 million and after capital contributions of 40.25 million, which is an increase of 6.4% over 2024. So we're pleased with that outcome, that we have an increase in overall net position. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about my comments or the executive summary or the full statements.
Being no comments, I'll move to a motion. May I have a motion that the Finance and Facilities and Institutional Risk and Compliance Committees recommend that the Board of Trustees approve the University of Rhode Island's audited financial statements for FY 2023?
Matt Lance, so moved.
Is there a second on to the motion?
Second, Mike Fascitelli.
Any discussion on the motion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Rahid?
Thank you, Robbie. The next item for action is approval of the communication site license agreement between the university and Selco Partnership, doing business as Verizon Wireless, for a rooftop facility on Eddy Hall, and recommendation to the board. Please take it away. Ryan, I guess.
Great, thank you so much. Ryan Carrillo is also here from our Planning and Real Estate Development Group. So this is an approval that we're seeking from the board to execute a communication site license agreement with Selco Partnership, which is Verizon Wireless, to install an additional antenna on one of our residence halls. They currently have an antenna on our water tower, and they're trying to increase coverage for the area. And we are excited about that opportunity, but are seeking board approval. I know we have, if anybody's interested, we do have a diagram on where this antenna would go on top of Eddy Hall. We can certainly pull it up if there's interest, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
Do we make money with the carrier? Do we make money off the antenna, Abby?
We do. So it's about 38,000 annually. So
Is the carrier paying us? Is that we get it from the carrier for?
that's correct.
Okay.
Okay. On this one, I just want to note that only, before I ask for a motion, only the Finance and Facility Committee members may vote on this action item. So may I have a motion that the Finance and Facilities Committee recommend that the URI Board of Trustees approve the request to execute a communication site license agreement with Selco Partnership, doing business as Verizon Wireless, for a rooftop facility on Eddy Hall at the University of Rhode Island Keystone campus, as presented?
So moved. Maria Ducharme.
Second, Mike Fascitelli.
Thank you. Discussion? There being no discussion, I'll ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? The motion is approved. Next item for action is the approval of contract between university and Next Gen Mechanical on recommendation to the board. Abby and Tracy, please.
Great, thank you. And Tracy Angel, who's our AVP for Strategic Procurement, is here if there are any specific questions. Essentially, this is a request to approve a contract that we believe over the life of the contract will exceed the $5 million threshold that the Board of Trustees is required to approve. It's a contract with Next Gen Mechanical, which is charged with doing our chiller repair and HVAC inspections for the campus. So the state did actually do bid and awarded a time and material contract for Next Gen Mechanical. And we did issue a purchase order up to $4.5 million, but we anticipate that over the life of the contract, we'll go beyond that $5 million. So we wanted to bring it to the board. We're still getting used to implementing this new policy. So I think this is the first one we're actually bringing to you for approval in the case that we go over $6 million eventually.
Abby, what is the length of the contract?
Tracy, I think 3 years. 3 years. Yeah.
So we expect more than $1.5 million a year.
Essentially,
That's
yeah,
consistent with what we've done in the past.
it is.
Any other questions from the committee members? Again, on this one, we only asked the Finance and Facility Committee members to vote on this. So may I have a motion? The Finance and Facilities Committee recommend that the URI Board of Trustees approve the contract between University of Rhode Island and NextGen Mechanical effective August 17, 2023 as presented.
This is Courtney, so moved.
Second, Mike Fascitelli.
Thank you, Is there any discussions? Are there? There being no discussion, I ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. Now we will go back, I believe, to discussion items, right, Michelle?
Correct.
Yeah, 2B, 2C, 2D. Abby, I'll ask you if you could introduce these items. They're housing and residential life master plan. It's 2B. 2C is approvals under the delegation of authority to preside to the president relating to land and property. And then 2D is approvals under the policy on approval and execution of contracts and other binding documents greater than $5 million.
Great, thank you. I was just wanting to confirm if Ellen Reynolds is on. Do we see her on? I know she was going to join for this portion.
Is not. No, I can send her a quick text.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm happy to introduce this. So as we've mentioned to the board previously, we recently undertook an effort to conduct a housing and residential life master plan. So we, in order to do this, consulted with Scion Advisory Services and Canon Design. So I want to make sure I recognize that we have Chelsea Bennett from Scion on the call and also Lynn Denninger from Canon. They're here if you have any specific questions, but I'm going to just walk through the study at a very high level. And Ellen and I will also be presenting this to the Student Life and Athletics Committee as well, just for your awareness. Can we pull the slides up, Michelle?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So the goal of this was to really establish a vision for the future of URI housing. There were a few elements of the study. One was to conduct a facilities condition assessment of all of our residential buildings to really give us information we need to make decisions about how we move forward with our residential housing. We wanted to, of course, make sure that we're providing a housing experience that aligns with our student and family expectations and supports academic success. I will also say housing is really key to our university competitiveness. So that's one of the things we're thinking through as we're looking at our housing plans. The plan is also to create an actionable plan. So including an assessment of what the financial requirements will be to make decisions around our future housing. And we wanted to make sure that it was in line with our URI strategic plan and also the housing residential life mission, vision, and organizational values. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to make sure that the plan really outlined what the impact would be on our financial performance and what the requirements would be moving forward. So that was the charge of the master plan. Next slide, please. So what were the outcomes we were looking for? Ultimately, we need to increase our beds. Housing is one of our most significant challenges for both first-year students and continuing students. As you know, it's a challenge in Rhode Island in general, but we've run into some issues with local communities where our students live. Most recently in Narragansett, they enacted an ordinance that limits the number of unrelated people that can live in housing, and that's resulted in a lot of our students being challenged to find housing where they traditionally would have been in housing in Narragansett. So we need to increase our beds. We want to make sure we have a developmentally appropriate array of unit types. We want to make sure that our spaces support academic outcomes and social emotional development. and be prepared to address future needs around social and emotional development. As you can imagine, things are changing in this post-pandemic world around what our students really need. From a facility standpoint, we want to make sure we're retiring outdated buildings that cannot be adapted to meet current needs. We want to reduce deferred maintenance backlog. We want to make sure that all residential buildings are accessible and have modern life safety and fire suppression systems, and also provide for consistent space across buildings. And then from a financial standpoint, we want to identify financing solutions that balance existing housing with increasing financing costs. We're seeing costs really increase post-pandemic specifically, and minimize inequity and experience. So we don't want to have a situation where we have the housing that is more expensive, really limited to a specific portion of our population. And finally, we want to limit our rate increases just to be in line with what students and families can afford going forward.
And excuse me, Abby, Ellen has joined.
Oh, great. Hi, Ellen. Welcome.
My apologies. I got tied up with a student emergency. I apologize.
So next slide. Okay, so Ellen, I'm going to turn it over to you for this. This is just a description of the current unit types that we have on campus.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Abby. So yes, this is just an outline of the types of facilities that we have on campus right now for students to live in. Many of you will be familiar with the traditional type of housing, which is what we often refer to as the double-sided corridor with larger restrooms and facilities on each floor. We also have what we call clusters, and that's where we have individual students who can live in groups. Oftentimes it's singles, doubles, or quads, and share some space associated with that, and a double bedroom. We have a modified suite, which is a hallway of doubles where there's a private bath shared oftentimes between those two units. Suites, which are what many people are familiar with, and those can be doubles or singles or mixed. And then there's a bathroom within the suite and some lounge space oftentimes there, but the suites lack a kitchen. And then our apartment style, which is very popular, and that is where individuals have their own bedroom space, but they have shared bathroom space, shared lounge space, and shared kitchen facilities in most of them.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. Next, thanks. Okay, so as I mentioned, we conducted a facilities condition assessment as part of the study to look at the current condition of our buildings. And as you can imagine, we have a significant number of buildings that are distressed. So if you look here, it's a 15-year outlook. The plan was actually a 35-year plan. We're focusing our presentation here on 15 years as the most sort of realistic and in the current kind of planning zone. But the 15-year outlook really shows that we have a number of buildings that are on the distressed list. So that's with a facility condition index of over 0.2. You can see there that that's defined below in the notes below. So ultimately, we have a number of buildings that are distressed. If you look at the map, you can see a legend. The red dots are distressed buildings that we are not recommending to demo in the first 15 years, but the red dot with the black star in it are buildings that would be recommended to be demolished. And that includes the Roger Williams complex and what we call the Little Four, Ellen. I'm getting used to our colloquial terms about our dorms, but a number of our dorms will have to be are not really worth renovating, just given their current state, and that we wouldn't be able to get them to a place where they would be really suitable housing for our students. So that's the overall 15-year outlook of our facilities, and I'm going to talk through 5, 10, and 15-year plan in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a look at what we have, our existing capacity, so 5,511 beds. And you can see in the chart up top what the different types of beds are. So Ellen mentioned that we have a variety of different types of housing for students. And 61% of our existing beds are traditional style, which, as you can imagine, is historically what universities have built, but not necessarily what students really always want. The greatest concentration of beds are in the south and west, if you look at the map. So north is to the top. The newest housing is in the northwest, that's Brookside. I think many of you are familiar with that dorm. We've had a board meeting there not too long ago. And then also Hillside in the southwest. The Roger Williams complex is really clustered around number 4, which is in the Central West Zone, and that's the largest bed count. So this is our current capacity. Any questions about that? Okay, let's move on to the 5-year vision outlined in this plan. Next slide. So the 5-year plan would increase the number of beds to 6,011 beds. And it would primarily do that by delivering, we're calling the buildings, we have letters assigned to the buildings for the plan. Building J, which this board probably knows we've talked about as new undergraduate housing, that we've been talking through options for that. We're envisioning at this time a public-private partnership to deliver that building. So it's, if you see where it is on the map, just north of Brookside is where it would be sited. And that would allow us to support decanting our triples. So we can talk more about that. Ellen can certainly talk to you about the impact of triples. We've had to triple to meet our student body needs, but it's really not competitive. It's not what students want. While it may be helpful in the short term financially, it doesn't help us in the long term remaining competitive. So we really are hoping to not have to triple students. So we deliver that building in the first 5 years. We'd increase the base bed count to 6,011. And then I also want to point out just north of Building J, you see around the letter 6, a parking garage. So that's not included in this financial plan, but it is considered an enabling project because you'll see in the 10 and 15-year plans, the idea is actually to build additional residence halls in that gray square around number 6. And that's going to take up a lot of the parking for our current students. And actually building J is going to remove parking for current students. So the recommendation as part of the plan was to construct a parking garage. So we're going to have to look into what that might mean and how we could handle that financially, but it's not included in the finances of this plan. Any questions on that? So this is a 5-year view. We go to the next slide. So the 10-year plan, I'll point out a few things. So the 10-year plan would be to deliver Building K. So that's just north of Building J, which is the new undergraduate housing that's north of Brookside. The way we've structured our public-private partnership, we're in a request for qualifications process right now, is that if we find a successful partner and we feel that we're moving forward on a good path, we will have the opportunity to potentially add a second residence hall with that partner. So that's how we're drafting the RFQ or RFP. So Building K would potentially be another public-private partnership, similar in vein to Building J. We also have here 2 buildings that are new. You'll see on the east side, B and D. So those are more traditional buildings. They would provide swing space to allow us to demolish existing residence halls. So Building D would add 330 beds, but would provide swing space to demolish Coddington and Tucker. And we would have to have some triples just for a few years while we're doing that. And then Building B would also add 300 beds, more traditional style, and would provide swing space for demo of Hutchinson and Peck. So this is where you start seeing, if you look on the map, the red dotted lines are where we're taking residence halls offline, and the yellow are where we're adding residence halls online. So that's the 10-year vision. Any questions about that? Okay.
What is the footprint of that parking garage you're proposing again? Which is now you have K on there.
I don't have an exact footprint. That's something we have to explore.
But if you go to previous slide, I thought you were showing the garage for that entire slot, right? So you're putting.
Oh, so the gray, it's a gray square, but the parking garage would just be over.
It's just going to be a small portion. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a smaller portion of that lot, but that is currently parking. So that's part of the concern, is that building K would take up that parking as well as the parking garage that's proposed.
This is Ahmed. Is the P3 qualifying RFP out? Is it out in the street?
It is the request for qualifications, and we're envisioning a 2-step process, which is the first is just to get input from potential partners that can demonstrate that they've done this kind of work and that we think might be able to have a positive relationship. And then we'll be able to do a request for proposal process that'll be whittled down to those that responded to the RFQ that we feel were qualified to move
That
forward.
RFP deadline is when?
I wouldn't say we have a deadline, but we're hoping to get it out. I'll look to Ryan at the current date on the schedule, but relatively in the next few months.
Yeah, so purchasing has the request for solicitation of qualifications. We haven't yet posted on the website, working with purchasing to finalize that. Our goal is to have that preliminary stage completed by December 18th, so we can shortlist firms based on their qualifications.
Thanks, Ryan.
Welcome.
How's the process for shortlisting? You have like a committee from within the university, you have consultants involved. I mean, how are you doing that?
So both, we do have an internal committee that will be reviewing the statements of qualifications, but we will be guided by Scion Advisory. So the same firm that has worked with us on the master plan is also working with us on the request for solicitations for the public-private partners.
Maybe we can chat some more while we're in person next week.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I know, a project of great interest. So if we could advance to the 15-year slide, just so we can get the final look. So if you look at 15 years, we've delivered building J, building K, B, and D. This slide shows delivering building C, which is an additional 360 beds, traditional style, which would provide swing space to demo 2 additional residence halls. It does assume a demo of Potter, assuming a new health and counseling center, which is part of the university's plan under the auxiliaries. It's part of our capital improvement plan. And then delivering building I, which provides swing space for demo of Hopkins. So if you see here, all of the Roger Williams complex buildings will be removed in that 15-year time frame. And then we'll continue to build new residence halls over the 35-year plan to get to the target bed counts. Next slide, please. So here's just a brief overview of the financial analysis that was conducted. This gives you a high-level view of where we are and where we would like to go in terms of new beds. So you'll see a 23 is our current footprint, and 39 is where this 15-year plan brings us. And you can see that some of the beds would be delivered by URI in the traditional way, and some beds will be delivered by a public-private partnership if we're successful through that process. It's 3,968 beds would be maintained, and then we'd actually demolish about 1,500 beds. So we're going to lose some and gain some throughout the process of this plan. Next slide, please. So how did we build the model? We worked with Scion and with Canon, but we gave them a lot of inputs from our own financials. So Ellen and her team worked really closely to provide information on housing and residential life allocation budgets. So I think the board is aware of this, but housing and residential life is an auxiliary function. So it's a group that really has to rely on its own revenues to support long-term financial investments. So their input was key. Also looking at the debt schedule. So housing and residence life can issue, well, the URI works with RIBEC to issue revenue bonds that are guaranteed against future housing and residential life revenues. We also gave them the housing and residence life room rate schedule, so people have an understanding of what our students are currently paying. Bed counts by unit type, as Ellen mentioned earlier, we have several different types. And then we received a planned project phasing and construction cost from Canon. So those are inputs to the model. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a snapshot of our financial assumptions. So we assumed a 4% revenue average annual escalation throughout the plan. I will say that 4% was really necessary to make the plan work. I think that from an HRL and competitiveness standpoint, I think is a challenging assumption that we could increase our revenue by 4% every year, just because we're trying to keep things affordable. Operating costs, we assumed a 3% average annual escalation, which I think has traditionally been our increase in operating costs. We're in a slightly different world now, so I think a lot remains to be seen about how our costs are going to increase over the future years. And then some assumptions based on construction costs per square foot for URI finance construction and for P3 construction. And finally, our debt service coverage. So we have a debt service coverage for our E&G bonds and also for our auxiliary bonds. So 1.2 is what we're looking for, target performance for our auxiliary bonds, but 1 is the absolute minimum that would be acceptable in the model. Next slide.
Abby, I just got a quick question on
Yeah.
The last slide on the revenue. Have you done any modeling on how this would be? So I know we've bucked the trend on enrollment decreases, but if we were to find ourselves in that same category of decrease in enrollment, how would this work? Would this be unsustainable?
So I would argue that we have more needs for housing than we have housing available. And I think even if our enrollment decreased, I don't anticipate it being a significant drop, but right now we're sort of planning for generally flat enrollment, especially on the undergraduate level, with potential increases on the graduate level. So I don't anticipate that we'd see a significant enrollment drop. If we did, I also don't anticipate we wouldn't be able to fill beds, but I will look to Ellen to comment on that because she's, tracking down to the room every bed that we have filled at URI. So Ellen, feel free.
Abby and Matt, a great question. So to Abby's point, I think predominantly we house first and second year students right now, but we have a greater desire for more to move back on campus. We just don't have the housing available for them, especially with the changes in ordinance in the local community where it's limiting the number of unrelated college students living together. I feel very confident, even if we had some enrollment decline, that we would be able to continue to fill our beds. And again, I think the trend is also our competitors are out there. They're not relying on triples. We've been fortunate to continue to have good enrollment, or I should say steady enrollment. It's not really been a great improvement because we're not looking to grow our undergraduate really. Much of this modeling is based on the current numbers we're experiencing. So I think we feel good about that. It's time to update our housing to the housing that students want to live in and that we need to advance forward.
Awesome, thank you.
Great.
Great, thanks. And here I just want to point out, because this was definitely a topic of discussion as we were building the model, sort of our peer rates comparison. So if you look at this, it's a snapshot of our housing costs for fall 2023 and how it relates to our peers. I think in some areas we are more expensive than our peers, and other areas we're less expensive, and we have opportunity potentially to increase our rates. So the red squares show pricing lower than URI. The green squares show pricing higher than URI. So, at a very general level, in the double range, I think we're on the higher end. When it gets to singles and apartments, we probably have some room there rate-wise to increase to be competitive with our peers. But this is obviously an important part of the equation here. Next slide, please. So this is really just a summary of where we landed financially. So you see here 5-year, 10-year, and 15 years. So this just gives the financials for the 3 slides I showed earlier. So delivering building J, we have there $155 million as an estimated cost for a P3. Again, if that's a P3, that would be essentially off of our books. So it would be design, build, and financed off of URI's books, but obviously in a project that we will want to be very closely aligned with, and we'd have discussions about maintaining and operating the building. Delivering building K would additionally be a P3, so that's estimated at $96 million. That would be a smaller building, so not 500 beds, but 400 beds. And then the following dorms would be more traditional. So you see the estimated cost per new building. So the total is about $535 million at the end of 15 years to really revitalize our housing stock in a way to increase our beds, remain competitive, and not throw good money after bad with renovating some of our older residence halls. So this is a snapshot of where we landed with the plan. If you have questions, we have a lot more information behind it, and we do have our consultants here who really built the model for us. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So basically, and I understand you're talking demolition, but we're talking about spending $535 million to add a net 700 beds.
For some reason, I think you sort of I didn't quite hear the question. Can
I
you say
said we're
that
talking
again?
about spending, maybe I was mumbling like I usually do, but maybe we're spending $535 million to add net 700 beds.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note here, it's a great question, that in order to net those beds, we really have to remove a
Right.
number of
No, I
beds
understand you're
from
talking about
facilities.
demolition and all that too. So
Yeah.
when we talk about a P3 and how the P3, I mean, there are other people on this call, Mike, that we can be a lot more knowledgeable about that business than I would be, is for a P3 partner to come in, their rate of return and what they have to spend and what they would get on the new housing. So the goal would be end up almost pretty much giving up the entire control of the housing in the university to a P3, to outside people, right? That's what we're talking about. In a way, to get a rate of return for them to go and invest that kind of money.
So again, and it may be on my end, Vahid, so I'm not entirely hearing you, but I think I understand the gist of your question. For a P3 perspective, so this is something we haven't done before. It's something we're exploring. And we certainly would not want to give control over entirely to a partner. We would view this as a long-term relationship with a partner. We would want to deliver housing that really is, to a student, sort of indistinguishable from our current housing. So we have similar conditions, similar requirements for the state of the facility. And we work with them on maintenance and operation. We've talked about having, for example, custodial be something that's retained at URI. That's really a primary point of interaction with our students. So the reason we're doing a request for qualifications is really to see which developers come to us and that we feel we could enter into this long-term conversation with, because we certainly know that we have to really have some form of control. But financially, we're in a really tough spot given the fact that we haven't.
No, I understand. What I was saying is that I'm not going to try to scream, but I got to find out what Ellen does for a microphone so I can do the same thing, so I can be loud and clear. But the thing is, I'm trying to find out if there's got to be something for them, right? At the end of the day. They're not doing whoever a P3 partner is. They're just not in the business of giving money away or building. They don't do this because they like to build stuff. So I'm trying to figure out, when I look at the general cost of the thing, how you would maintain, and you showed us a slide about how our pricing is. And to get a partner to come in, they will set pricing, I assume. And I was referring to Mike Fascitelli, who is more in the business than I would be. But I mean, I don't know how it would work. I understand that's the direction we have to go, but it would be a different arena that we're dealing with. So,
yep.
Yeah.
And we will have to see what proposals come in through the detailed RFP process. I think we have discussed internally that there could be a need to subsidize, for lack of a better term, the financing for the building in order to make the rates affordable for our students. So obviously the partner is going to have to look at what their construction costs are and think about what the revenue, because they will be receiving the revenue from our students. So it needs to pencil so that it can remain affordable for our students. And we do, as I think we've discussed, we have authorization to borrow for a new undergraduate housing dorm. We could potentially borrow against that authorization to be able to make the project affordable if the public-private partner can't do it. But that's obviously not our goal. Our goal is to see what they can come up with and see if there's a way that they can do it in a way that's affordable for our students.
I mean, I'm saying you're going to an RFQ, which you're going to shortlist based on, and then you're going to select someone. Wouldn't it be probably a better option to do a request for information in some sort of industry outreach? And I know you're getting your information from the consultant, right? So my job is to question, right? So I'm just questioning things to see what kind of thought process went into it, right? Because I don't think it's as simple as we think it might be.
You know what would be helpful, Abby, is for us to see like the economic model. So I think you're on a good path here. You're going to get a lot of good information back on what partners could execute on this plan. But I think actually, because we're basically giving up a revenue stream, right? It's going to come out of, it's fees that we would normally get that will then get paid back to whoever's doing this, whoever the partner is. So I think it'd be good to see like what fees do we give up, what fees do they get, and then the cost of this relative to, I mean, it's like a discounted value model. Like you figure out what do you give up in the next X amount of years in fees versus what you would have to lay out.
Yep, absolutely. And that will be obviously part of our analysis for the RFP and what we receive. So part of the challenge is, as I'm sure you all are aware, that we have, so we would be giving up revenue, but we also would have to borrow against that revenue, right? So the question is, could a private partner build it more efficiently, deliver it more quickly in order to alleviate our really critical housing needs? In a way that works well within the kind of landscape of Rhode Island. And we've been working, definitely looking at the legal aspects and the purchasing aspects and the labor aspects of doing this kind of public-private partnership. So yes, that certainly will be part of our analysis. We don't want to do anything that won't make sense financially for the university, but we also know that we need to move quickly. I would say this is our top priority at the university, to remain competitive and make sure our enrollment stays strong. So
Can I interject a few things here, Abby?
Please.
I think we should take this analysis and put a column in here that says cost per bed, because we're creating different products here, and I'd like to see which product is giving us the most bang for our buck on the new one. And that has to do with what kind of buildings we're building. Are we building 3-story buildings? We're not gonna go into steel. We're gonna go into, for one podium and 5 stories, what the codes are for that. They're gonna have kitchenettes in them and the apartment. We're also building different kinds of buildings. Some have apartments, some have different types of configuration. So I think we have to look at it on a cost per square foot basis, as well as a cost per bed basis. And I've always thought the P3 does give some benefits in getting certainty in cost, but it's easier to implement in graduate housing than undergraduate housing, because the pricing of this has to be controlled by URI, not by that partner. So again, I think there's a lot of things to think through before we do it, but I think we need a little more information as to what we're doing in terms of what we're creating in terms of efficiency and what types of buildings we're actually building.
Thank you. And I'm happy to turn to Sion or Cannon if they want to comment on the kind of assumptions made around the building type as we were looking through this plan.
Good afternoon, Chelsea Bennett here from the Scion Group. Thank you all for having us as part of the conversation. High-level assumptions utilized at this point for that initial P3 project, really looking for largely a similar building type as to Brookside 1. So that would be apartment style approach. I think as a lot of folks have identified here, that the next phase or next piece, that RFP portion, is where we're going to get a lot of the additional details in the proposals and be able to create that kind of apples to apples comparison on each of the potential partners and from their financials and perspective, et cetera. But as it relates to that first P3, it's really a duplication of Brookside 2 and Brookside 1, excuse me.
So Chelsea, let me also add Vahid and Margot. I want to comment. I just want to make sure I've understood you correctly, because I think Vahid, that your question introduced the idea that this whole expansion would be P3. And we're looking solely at the first 2 residence halls being P3. The majority of the 15-year plan would be self-performed. So that's important to note. And part of the reason for jumpstarting us with the P3 is because when we issue new bonds, it's issued on the faith and credit of the auxiliaries overall. And we have other requirements to support our student populations with health services as well as the Memorial Union in these earlier years. So by being able to partner with the P3 and not issuing that debt and not having the debt service payments directly from the university, we then have the ability to also offer opportunities to the other auxiliaries that we need to advance at the same time. Coming in later, then we have the ability to come in after the P3 partner, which is just those 2 distinct locations, and then continue in a traditional manner where we continue to keep the revenue on our books. So it kind of is a hybrid there.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ryan. That's good clarification. So are we talking about, I hope you can all hear me now, right? Is it okay?
Yes.
Are we talking about that P3 partner also is going to build a garage for you?
So we don't have that currently in the mix, but we need to pencil that out to see how that would affect the overall plan. Right now, well,
Yeah. So the thing I was focusing on is what Mike said about the cost per bed. That's important to have also, right? And I do agree with him what he said about the P3s that I have seen for education, for housing, for student housing, tend to be kind of apartment type thing that mostly go towards graduate students and those undergrad who get shut out of housing, or who can afford it, you can spend more to be living next to campus or some places on the campus, on the edges of it, and things like that. So price wise, that whole slide about how competitive we are with other universities of our peers kind of is out the door with a P3, I think.
so
I'm
that
an expert, but I think that's important to understand. Secondly, there's other things involved. Doing a P3 in Rhode Island is probably a lot different than doing P3 in, I don't even want to say what states, other places, right? Those are the things that come into the picture that if you had done, if you did some sort of outreach, brought people in and had a 2-day session, 4-day session with your consultants running, you'd have had better sense to me, maybe shame on me, maybe we knew about this, but we now have an RFQ out. Expectation of RFQ is someone to submit their qualifications. They're not going to tell you what you're going to do here. They're going to tell you what they've done elsewhere for the RFQ. Then you're going to probably shortlist people based on an RFQ and issue a proposal for them to then come in and price something that we're not quite sure what it is ourselves yet. That's how it goes usually, right? So it puts you in a place that I don't think we're really sure what we want to get, and we've gone to our, and I fully acknowledge the need for urgency, right? But I'm not sure we're covering all the bases here before we go to an RFQ, because you get one chance as that first impression, right? If the first time around you get people to do RFPs and we don't have our act together and we delay things or we cancel things, you've lost a lot of credibility in the marketplace for the next time around for people to come in and spend the time, because it costs people to do an proposal for you, right? And so we lost credibility. I'll just tell you, I'm not a housing person, but I'm in that business. Mike probably knows more about the real, not probably, definitely knows more about the real estate side of it. Armin can talk about other issues politically within Rhode Island that is involved. I think discussion would have been good.
Yeah, I think the RFQ process is a little bit. I think Brian and those guys have not. I'm not as worried about that. I'm really worried with the RFP process.
Right, I agree with you. Yeah.
Which is really how that's going to work. The venture, the cost things. That to me is really. And I don't know where we are on that, what we want to achieve, but like there will be a rub. Who prices those units? You know, how do you price those things? If the guy's got money in it, I mean, that's where a lot of these things. So I think the RFQ process is fine, and we're going to learn a lot. But we're not going to really. I don't think we're ready to go for an RFP yet. Candidly, given what I've seen on undergraduate.
So right now the RFQ is the only thing that's going on the street. The public procurement process precludes us from reaching out to vendors in advance of that. So we can't meet with vendors and start to talk to them about the idea that this is coming forward and have that discussion. We do have a planned, I'll say, kind of a blitz approach. Once the RFQ hits the street, then we're allowed to reach out to firms and they just let them know it's there. So it's here, and try to drum up as many responses as we can to the RFQ so that we broaden our pool so that we can evaluate those, and then from there, working with the overall team to target the RFP, which will be issued after the new year. So we're not quite there with the RFP. I agree, Mike, that we need additional information to move forward there. But the first step is just getting an idea.
One more comment that, and I'm going to like just again, typically when you do an RFP or P3, what are you looking for? You're looking for what skills are going to be critical, building to building, GMP at a certain cost. Can they do it better? Is it going to be their capital? We don't really need help leasing the building, which is usually one of the key aspects of risk in a real estate deal is lease up of the building, right? We control that because of the supply. So we may select somebody very different here than if you were doing something a mile off the campus, because the leasing of this is really, we got a captive audience, as Abby said, with a lot, and Ellen, with a lot of wait lists in a sense, so we can move that around. We can undercut that guy down the street by $200. Like, there's gonna be a lot of issues in pricing here. So the idea of what we're trying to look for in the RFP is different than a normal real estate deal, which would have capital, construction, leasing abilities and risk. The average apartment turns over 50%. When they have to lease it up every year, every 2 years. So I just think we have to think through what we're trying to buy. So I'm going to tell you, we might be able to buy construction expertise, keep the cost down, certainty. But I just want to know what we really need here. What we really are doing this for is because we can't afford to do it on our own. We would do the undergraduate housing by ourselves, probably. I think that would be the conclusion after all that.
And Ryan, thank you. I think we just semantics. I think we all agree. I think I would say an RFI, you say an RFQ. To me, the purpose of it would be to get people to come to the table, talk to the industry, get information. To me, RFQ is a very generic thing that will just kind of like stack up your qualifications and send it to you. But if your intent is to engage as part of the RFQ, then I'm all over that. That's great. So
Yeah, that's certainly our intent. And as Ryan mentioned, we're pretty limited by the state purchasing rules to do any of that engagement before issuing the RFQ, which is why we're taking the two-step approach. But this is all really helpful feedback. Certainly happy if it's helpful to have another committee meeting with finance and facilities and talk this through. I'll let the leadership decide if that's what they want to do before our next meeting, which I think is in February. And we'll have a sense of our RFQ at that point.
Can our housing advisors, can they provide us with what kind of buildings we bought, what the cost per bed is, and take that analysis one step further? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that. And then I did want to point out, because Ryan, you made a great point earlier about the impact to auxiliaries revenue and borrowing on our debt. And I wanted to make sure people make the connection that some of the other big auxiliary projects that we have that you've heard a lot about are Student Health Center and Memorial Union. So those are also really two big projects that we're envisioning borrowing for. So I want to make sure people make the connection on the board with that when Ryan was talking about auxiliaries, like the whole auxiliaries portfolio, housing and dining is a significant part of that, but we also have needs in Student Health Center and MU. So we're trying to take kind of a full portfolio approach, which is why we're exploring the P3 on this side. So really appreciate all the feedback, and we'll certainly follow up with the comments that were made. Thank you.
thank you. And Margot, one question since you're on there. Is it something that maybe that ad hoc real estate committee should be talking about too, or not?
I mean, in the context of the whole approach to real estate,
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah.
But I don't want to slow this down, and I think there's been a ton of work that's gotten us to this stage. So if we need to get a higher comfort level with where we are, I think we should do that fast, because I think there has been a lot of discussion, and getting us to this stage doesn't commit us, but it gives us a lot of information. And so, I mean, from my perspective, and maybe because I've been a little more involved, I'm satisfied. I know Mike Pastelli has had a chance to look at it. Armin's looked at it. Armin, you're welcome to say yourself, but I want to make sure that we're giving. I understand the feedback, but I also want to make sure that we're getting to a point where we can get enough information to make a decision.
But at this point in time, I think the RFQ is ready to go, and that's not slowing down. So definitely. Correct? Am I right, Abby?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's
So
out already.
I thought it was already
It's
out,
not
but
an action here. We're just having a discussion, I think. So good.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So there being nothing else, we can go to the next item. Hopefully it gets easier. It's about an easement agreement between University of Rhode Island and Narragansett Electric Company for an overhead underground distribution system on the southerly side of the South Ferry Road, enclosure 2C.
Thank you. Yeah, this is just informing the board that the president did approve through his delegation of authority and easement to Narragansett, let's see, to RI Energy related to, Narragansett Electric Company for overhead and underground distribution. So this was related to site work at the Narragansett Bay campus. So we needed this easement in order to do the electrical work, and the president did approve it, and he is required to notify the board of that. So that's what this discussion item is. Any questions on that one?
All right. No questions. We go to the next item, D, approval under the policy on approval and execution of contracts and other binding documents greater than $5 million.
Yeah, so I want to clarify what this is. If you may recall, in September, I discussed that we were having a number of change orders for contracts that were previously approved before our new policy under the amount of $5 million, and the change orders brought them above $5 million. So the recommendation was to inform the committee when that happened that the change order was approved if it didn't materially change the nature of the contract that was originally approved. So that's different than seeking approval for a new contract that's over $5 million. So in this case, what we're seeking to inform the committee is that we did approve a change order for a contract with Atlantic Control Systems. That's also HVAC, but really our chiller systems on the campus. So the original contract amount was $4.8 million that was approved before the new policy was implemented, and the change order would bring it up to $7.6 million. So this is more of an informational item.
So I think we talked about at the time when we're having discussion about that item, talking about when you have change orders that take you over, potentially an action we could do, and I think we're going to think about it, get back to us, that we could ratify the new total and give you a 10% or whatever percent. I gave you from my experience from other like state agencies in other states, that we could get a ratification in to ratify up to that point and give you an additional 10-15% leeway to just go in without having to come back to us to go through. I mean, that's something that's still out there. It has nothing to do with this one. But I don't know if you still look at that or not.
We're certainly open to having that conversation. If I think that would be probably an amendment to the policy, which we could consider, but we haven't amended the policy to date. So we're
streamlines the process a little further, so you can just move forward and not to have to come back to it. I personally don't have a question on this one. I don't, any other questions? I think people are exhausted from the housing discussion or listening to the housing discussion. So.
And as I mentioned, we'll have the housing discussion at SLA as well. So I think there'll be more opportunity for feedback with that committee. So we look forward to that.
Okay. I believe, Michelle, unless I'm incorrect, the next agenda item is to adjourn. Am I correct?
You are correct.
All right. With that in mind, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
This is Courtney, so moved.
Second.
Ask for a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you all. Thank you for Abby and Ryan for indulging us with all our questions.
Happy to. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.